Okay, so should we get to? I was sad that like literally we ended. The last time we recorded was what, 2 weeks ago, and we talked about Starliner being a thing, but we didn't know what was going to happen by the time the episode dropped.
Yeah, I think it was going up the very next day.
It was
recorded.
Yep, it went up the morning after we recorded. Did you pay attention to the Starliner mission?
I did.
I saw you tweet some stuff, and I responded. I wasn't sure what was happening, but it sounded like there was something didn't go as planned, but it wasn't a total failure.
That's the best summary, honestly. The most like logical summary I've heard, because people lost their mind about it, saying, "Oh, NASA favorites Boeing and all this stuff. They're saying it went pretty well." It's like it did actually go, quite frankly, pretty well. So I'm going to give you guys the quick rundown. So as we talked about the last time we recorded, Boeing launched their Starliner spacecraft, and I was excited about this because this is obviously the other commercial crew provider. For the commercial crew, there's SpaceX's Dragon capsule, which flew for DM-1, the uncrewed flight test last year, and then this was Boeing before the end of the year, just barely squeezing it out. December 20th, they got their flight test in. So this also was uncrewed, and this is, of course, a Starliner riding on top of the Atlas V rocket. And this is a unique Atlas V rocket. This is the Atlas V N22. So that means no fairing on top of it. As you can see in this still frame, it has 2 solid rocket boosters, one on each side, and it has 2 upper stage engines. So this is a really unique version of the Atlas V that has never flown before, which is kind of fun that it's going to be the one also powering or flying humans. Now, something that, that's going to be loud. So something that's pretty fun about this is you'll notice that the solid rocket boosters burn for the first, minute and a half, 2 minutes or something. And then they did something really unique. And this caught me off guard. I did not know this was going to happen. The solid rocket boosters burnt out and they held onto them.
They didn't.
And I've never really seen that. They didn't jettison them right away. And they even call it out. They're like, we're going to hold on to them for an additional, I forget if they say 80 seconds or 38 seconds, something like that. But you'll see here pretty soon that the solid rocket boosters will burn out and they don't jettison them. And it was just really unique.
What was the reason for that?
So, here we go. Burn out the solid rocket motor. So you'll see that the stuff will change quite a bit. Well, maybe not in that feed. But yeah, the solid rocket boosters burnt out. And the reason is they actually, because they're flying at such a shallow and different trajectory, normally the Atlas V will go kind of up pretty high and has a totally different trajectory. But because this is flying humans and because they need to make it so if they abort at any time, they would be able to survive re-entry. They have to take this really shallow, unique profile. And that puts it stays in the denser parts of the atmosphere longer. It puts additional stresses on the solid rocket boosters. There's more aerodynamic pressure on them. So if they were to jettison them at the normal time, it might be too close to recontacting with the main booster. So now they finally jettison them. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So that was a fun thing, but that was nominal. That was supposed to happen. So that was already, as it happened, I was already quite shocked. And Comrade has, in our Discord channel here, check this out. This is a profile. This is from flightclub.io. So a pretty normal Atlas V is the blue line, and the green line is the one that it flew. You can tell how much shallower. So, it stays... Whereas, a normal one will be at 100 kilometers within, it's 60 miles downrange. This is 150 miles downrange before it reaches 100 kilometers in altitude. Very, very different profile.
What do the dots mean on there?
Is that where they jettisoned things?
That might be. Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yep. Stage separation, it sounds like, according to Comrade. Good. Yeah. Good questions. It seems like, so that's where the stage separates. So that shows just how much longer it stays in the shallow parts of the atmosphere, in the denser parts of the atmosphere. Pretty cool. So yeah, so for those of you listening, if you're just listening, sorry, basically you have 2 lines. One arc's a lot higher than the other, and the other one's a lot shallower. And those are the 2 different flight profiles. But anyway, everything was the Atlas V that the Starliner rode on top of, which is, of course, built by ULA, which is United Launch Alliance. Look at that. So that stage separation or booster shut down. And Then they lit up the dual RL-10 engine. And this was all we got for video after this point, basically, was that. And now people looking at screens.
Now we find out what happened, Tim. They weren't using Macs. They were using PCs.
Careful. You just
Their
triggered.
microphone settings weren't set up right.
That's right. Yep. They didn't have Tim there to troubleshoot the settings on the PC.
That's very insider baseball for those who are just listening.
Oh, but so the Atlas V performed absolutely perfectly. Put them on a bullseye, quote unquote bullseye insertion for the Starliner. But here's something interesting about the whole mission: they intentionally keep the entire vehicle. When the rocket will let go of the actual spacecraft, it's still suborbital. Actually, it puts it into like a 80 by 40, so 80 kilometers high at the highest point and 40 kilometers at the lowest point, something around there, which is really, really low. That's not a normal orbit. So in other words, if the Starliner doesn't do its insertion burn, it would have just like re-entered right away and come back down on the time around. So the Starliner itself actually does the orbital insertion. This is kind of similar to the space shuttle. I don't know if you guys remember, but the space shuttle, when it got into orbit, basically when it burnt out of the main fuel tanks, it let go, or main engines, it let go of the orange fuel tank. Then the orange fuel tank actually re-entered because it was technically barely suborbital, but like just exactly suborbital. And then it used those little small motors on the back, the OMS, the orbital maneuvering system motors, and then it put itself into its final orbit. It's basically that exact same profile here for Starliner. Starliner does its own orbital insertion. And here's where things got interesting.
Dun,
So,
dun.
so we're watching this live. This is like 4 a.m. or something. And I think this is about where we see it. So notice on the left side of the screen, or there's 3 screens up in Mission Control. This is Johnson Space Center. This is actual NASA headquarters, or, Johnson Space Center, and this is the actual mission control for the International Space Station. So they're sitting here watching it, and all of a sudden you start to see everyone kind of like getting up out of their seats and getting kind of confused. And the body, that was what I first noticed, was the body language started changing. And I started going like, uh-oh, is something not right? And here you can see all of a sudden the spacecraft is pointed like at totally the wrong way. And it's firing its engines kind of constantly.
Oh.
And all of a sudden they tell us, they're like, we are delaying orbital insertion. And, things are, which you can't really delay orbital insertion too much. You kind of have a window of time. If you delay it by too much, you're just re-entering.
Right.
So this was an interesting thing for them to call out, basically.
Insertion as in getting into your orbit.
Yep, you just do a final like little poof of in this case it would normally use its main has larger orbital maneuvering motors, and just all it needs to do is accelerate maybe a couple 100 meters per second and put itself into a final orbit, probably something like 300 meters per second or something, like a nice little small orbital insertion burn. And that's out of like 7,500 or something, meters per second. So another 300 is a pretty small, 100, 200, 300 would be a pretty small amount of acceleration, a small amount of delta V. So we start to see people kind of moving around in their chairs a little bit around here. I think this is about when that happened. This guy started standing at his desk, and that's when I realized, okay, something's not right. And he's starting to make phone calls and stuff. And
Houston?
Yeah. Say it.
We have a
There,
problem.
look at that.
Yeah, that's a pretty clear gesture right there.
Yeah.
Guys, I don't
When
know.
your arms are up in the air, yeah, look at this is it right here. This is when I go, okay.
Didn't you do this on Kerbal? What's going on? I thought we already did this 50 times.
All right, get the camera guy out of here.
Yeah.
Turn off the cameras.
So that's when we realized, okay, there's something going on, and they weren't really saying anything, and we don't have any footage of anything. So basically what ended up happening in the long run, it was kind of most things, if something goes wrong, there's normally something else to fix it. So there's about 3 things here that kind of stacked on top of each other that made it so this particular test flight did not perform as planned. So they had to call off the actual rendezvous and docking with the International Space Station, which of course is kind of the primary thing they're trying to test out. They're trying to get it up to the space station, go to the space station, hang out for a full week, deorbit and re-enter and touch down in New Mexico. That was the original plan and the goal and all that stuff. So all of a sudden at this point, they're starting to say, we're seeing things go wrong. What happened? There's an internal mission clock on Starliner. There's also an internal mission clock on the rocket. Somehow those two clocks got off. And the Starliner clock was just at the wrong elapsed mission time. So once it let go of the rocket, it was on to the spacecraft to do its own thing. And all of a sudden it thinks it's in a different time in the whole mission. I still don't know actually how much it was off, if it was like minutes or hours or what. So it was trying to hold itself and performing a maneuver really that it didn't need to do and wasn't supposed to do. And it was probably freaking out going like, wait, I'm supposed to be here, but I'm here. And it starts just kind of shooting its thrusters all over the place, holding this really precise attitude control, trying to like figure it out. And it did that at a time where apparently it was in an unalignment with the TDRS satellites, the data and relay satellites that allow Houston and ground control to be able to, directly control the spacecraft. So it's doing this in a time, and because it changed orientation on them, they couldn't communicate with it to tell it to stop doing that. And this is so it had a mission clock problem. The alignment of it threw it out of whack with the TDRS satellites. And then third problem is if people were on it, they would have been able to just go, off.
Yeah, I heard one of the astronauts say that if they were on there, that would have actually not been a problem.
Yeah.
What's
for
going
once,
on? Oh, no. Turn that off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just like when your microphone's in auto volume and you need to just like override it.
And your normal camera doesn't work, so you have the potato cam.
Yeah. It's just like that, Ben. Do you know anything about any of this stuff?
Don't know what you're talking about. I only shoot in 8K RAW, so,
That's raw, right? What you're
1 terabyte
shooting.
per minute.
Very raw.
So then it misses its orbit and comes back down, right?
No, they actually about 4 or 5 minutes later they're able to regain communication link with Starliner, and luckily and regain control. It basically told it to stop freaking out, and they immediately got it into an orbit. And it was, realistically, when you're talking about orbits, there's only when you go into orbit, you're on that inclination. Like, you're not going to change your orbit by that much. Mm-hmm. But so they basically just like got it into its orbit. The problem is it had already burned through so much of its propellant, it was not safe to proceed trying to dock with the International Space Station.
Right.
Gotcha.
So by the time they had a handle on everything, they basically realized we don't have the safe margins to go up and dock with the International Space Station. And that's, realistically, it probably could have. But everything, there's a huge safety margin, especially when you're talking about sending a huge, a multi-ton spacecraft that's could be hurtling towards exactly with 6 humans on board. You just the safety protocols and the stuff is, you wouldn't believe it. So basically, yeah, they had to call off the rendezvous and docking with the International Space Station, which was a shame. But it did still allow them to be able to test virtually everything else. They even deployed the docking port in space to make sure everything worked on that end. They were able to use the radar systems and the star trackers and all the thrusters, fire them all up, make sure everything performed as normal. And then instead of it being a week-long mission, they ended up re-entering 2 days later. And they ended up coming in for an absolutely, honestly, like a picture-perfect bullseye landing in New Mexico. And it's actually the first time an orbital capsule like this landed on land in the United States. In the United States, because that's how Soyuz does it. But the United States has always splashed down with their capsules with people. So, yeah.
So a successful failure.
It really perfectly successful failure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what did you guys think? Did you guys hear about this? And did you hear people going nuts and all that stuff?
I heard a little bit of that. I don't Twitter too much, so I was a little bit insulated from it. But I heard that it didn't quite go to plan, and I didn't know exactly why. So this was educational for me. That's why I hang out with you.
I didn't know what it was supposed to do, I guess, from the beginning. Like it didn't. When I saw, I think your tweet or someone else's tweet that it didn't go as planned, I just assumed the whole thing like exploded or something. Like I didn't, you know what I mean? I just assumed, oh, complete loss. And then it was like, oh, no, it's still doing stuff. So, yeah, it was. Now, when was this? The 20th, you said, or something? 19th?
The 20th.
So,
Yeah.
So you have so in terms of Boeing stuff, because this was a Boeing capsule, right? So you have this. You have the 737 MAX failure.
Fiasco.
And then on Christmas Eve, the CEO gets fired.
Yeah.
And don't forget the SLS program. The rocket that has cost so far $16 million and done nothing and been years behind
Billion, you mean?
is also Boeing.
Do you mean?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
16 billion, yeah.
No, wait, you're not talking about when the tank ruptured.
No.
Yeah, that was
planned.
supposed
Yeah,
to
yeah.
happen.
Just
Yeah,
in
that was supposed to
general. Yeah, so it's kind of the perfect storm for the CEO to kind of get canned.
Yeah.
Plus, we kind of made fun of him on the show. So I'm just saying,
Well-
any CEOs out there, you better watch out because, you know, I'm looking at you, Jeff Bezos. You know,
The power we hold.
Obviously, hugely influential here, so look out, people.
that's right. It's funny. I
But-
did a video where I made fun of the Mercedes CEO, and then a week later he stepped down.
See? We got to be careful with these powers.
Causation. I'm just saying, it happened.
But the important thing to remember here, people just want to be jerks, you know, and I don't believe that there's any favoritism, in NASA. I don't know. You know, people are quick to be like, well, of course, you know, if this happened to SpaceX, that NASA would have made that. There are times where I think that there are definitely things where it seems like SpaceX doesn't get the favor, like what's that called? The something of doubt, the benefit of the doubt, you know, where it does feel like Boeing does. So I'll agree with that. Like there are times where I'm like, okay, come on, you know, but in general, I really think that NASA's not going to be skimping on this. And if they go through all the checklist things that was required, and if they think it's safe for humans, because again, if a human wrote on this, it would have been perfectly fine, and it probably would have been a successful mission.
Even
And-
if it went exactly as it did, they would have still survived, which is the
Been
point,
perfectly
right?
fine. Yeah, exactly. So are we to say that we're so, because people are, on one hand, they're always saying like, why is NASA being so risk averse? Like, just get people on there. You know, we're years behind in the commercial crew program. Just get them on there. And then something like this happens where they would have been perfectly safe. Astronaut and crew safety was still first and foremost. And then people are still like, oh, see, I'll bet you NASA's going to give them a pass and all this stuff. Like, no, I
bet NASA's going to do the thing I've been saying that they need to do.
Exactly. Oh, but it's because it was Boeing.
About time.
It's just people like, I want people just to like remember that it's not always, I don't know. It doesn't always go as planned, but I'm going to give NASA the benefit of the doubt of doing what's best for their astronauts and for the safety of the crew on board and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Is it a fair thing to say, and this is coming from a SpaceX fanboy, that maybe, I mean, look, NASA's been working with SpaceX for what, 10 years? And they've been working with Boeing for like 60 years.
Right.
So maybe Boeing's kind of earned their trust over the years enough to where maybe they do get a little bit lighter treatment than SpaceX does. Is that a fair thing to say? I'm just putting it out there.
I definitely think that would be the reason they would get, if there is some kind of favoritism.
If there is, yeah.
It's because of that legacy and that heritage. Yeah.
Right.
SpaceX is the work wife, and Boeing is the woman you've been married to for 50 years, right? It's a different relationship that you have.
Way to make it scandalous.
You
Yeah.
know,
Come on.
that's what we do out here in California.
But basically, the landing was perfect. The cool thing is they're reusing the spacecraft, so they'll actually be refurbishing it and using it for their second crewed version or crewed flight. So that's exciting because it comes back. Yeah, let me see if I can find some footage because it comes back honestly in great shape.
The second crewed flight, meaning there will be a different one that's used for the first crewed flight.
Correct. There'll be a brand new spacecraft that comes in here. Let me share this with you. A brand new spacecraft will be the first crewed flight, which is CFT, which will be the crewed flight test. So here you can see that's the vehicle after it re-entered in the desert. splashes down in the desert. And then this is NASA crew personnel going out and beginning to secure it and everything. Now remember this thing just on touchdown, and it has these big airbags that it lands on to make it extra absorbent and smooth and soft landing for the crew on board. The Soyuz capsule, when it lands like this, it has little propulsive thrusters that it fires literally at the last second. It just goes just to bleed off a little bit of that extra velocity.
That's what New Shepard does.
Yep, exactly. The New Shepard does that same type of thing. But Boeing opted for these large airbags, which also make it, I think, a little bit better for a splashdown.
Dust down?
Or if it had to do a splashdown. Like if it had to do a...
Dirt down?
When it does a touchdown, it's great, but also it helps with if it had to do an abort splashdown.
Those parachutes look like Captain America's shield.
They do, literally. Here you can see it deploying its heat shield.
Heat shield, yeah.
Yeah, and inflating those airbags. So this is cool. It's cool that they'll be reusing this. I think that's always fun to see. And it's supposed to be able to be reused about 10 times. But yeah, nice. I just thought that was probably the biggest. But look at how, let's see if we can find footage of when it's actually like done. Because it really came back looking clean. Look at this. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Are they going to leave that there for Burning Man, or?
They'll set it on fire.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. That'd be the coolest Burning Man. I'd go to that. But yeah, I mean, again, say what you will. I'm just excited that this flew. I hope that this means, we'll talk about this later, but I hope that means we'll finally see people flying in 2020.
So quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so SpaceX docked the Dragon Crew Dragon, and then they did the abort test, right?
Well, they're trying to do the abort test. They haven't done that in-flight abort test yet. But they did their first, like, the pad abort. They did that in, 2015.
Right. So I'm just trying to get the cadence down here, or the sequence. So does that mean that Boeing still needs to do an abort test for Starliner?
Boeing only did a pad abort, and they just did that pretty recently. That was, November, I think, or October. Pretty recently, they did their pad abort. That was the one where one of the parachutes didn't come out. So remember, again, Boeing had a pretty rough year in that sense, where just things did not look pretty. And so did SpaceX, because SpaceX lost that Dragon capsule and blew up, a Starship prototype and lost 2 Falcon Heavy center cores. It was a year of hardware loss for everybody.
But given the number, you need to have a ratio there, because how many launches did SpaceX have comparatively?
Right.
100 or something. I don't know.
A lot of events, yeah.
Yeah,
but
a lot, far more than Boeing did, right? But that's not the point. I think I like your sentiment. The point is we all should be in this together, so to speak, really, because that's the beauty of this. And I'm sure there's intense competition, and it's business, and there's money at stake. But I think as a consumer of this, and not somebody that is your livelihood, I think we all should just be rooting for everyone, really, because the thing, it's so grand. The result here of sending people off this planet, it's it doesn't matter who does it. It's special, right? Mm-hmm. We all should be for this. It shouldn't be Boeing sucks, SpaceX, woo, right. Or vice versa.
Right. I mean, the horse race is fun. It's kind of hard to not get wrapped up in it, and that's fine. And if you want SpaceX to win, great, but don't wish ill on the other side, just because of that. Here's what I think they should do, in the spirit of unity, is launch both of the crewed versions at the same time, dock in space, do a little zero gravity dance with all the astronauts, maybe even switch out, show each other, hey, here's the button in the Starliner, oh, here's the screen in the Dragon, and then we can all be like, oh,
it's voice control.
And
it's just listening to you all the time.
It'll be I like this transition, but it will be like the Apollo Soyuz mission, only the commercial crew, let's love first mission. I don't know. Oh, speaking of voice command. Oh, sorry. Actually, we're not going to transition yet. Joe, to answer your question, because we did have a little tangent there. Basically, the milestones we're looking for now, SpaceX has to perform in-flight abort test, which is currently scheduled for about a week from now almost, or the 11th, I think, January 11th. I will be attending that. that's one that I have to see because there's a good chance we'll see a booster explode. And I mean, how can
That's always fun.
go see that? Yeah. So I'm going down for that one. And then after, if that goes well, then SpaceX, Elon said on Twitter that the Crew Dragon, it will be shipping in February. It needs to have some checks. And he actually said, I think a few months. So at best, we're looking at like May, June for the flight test. And then Boeing, at this point, I have no idea. They don't actually have anything after this. It's up to NASA. If NASA says that they're good to go for the crew flight test, it'd be a matter of, I think Boeing still needs to do some things internally. I've heard that they've been that they didn't have the abort system armed on this flight. The uncrewed test, they didn't actually have it like armed or ready. And it sounds like they're still kind of trying to like finish certification on that whole system. Even though they've done their pad abort, it still sounds like they're just trying to like finish up certification on some of that stuff. So we might be waiting on that. So it's still totally anyone's race at this point, which is interesting.
That makes it fun.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Hey, thanks for checking us out, guys. I hope you enjoyed this clip from our podcast.
We do a weekly show here on YouTube, so make sure to subscribe to Our Ludicrous Future, where we discuss all the things that are going to make our future totally ludicrous.
You can join us here on YouTube or at any of your favorite podcast places. Plus, if you want to get some behind-the-scenes stuff and join a cool community, you can help support the channel at patreon.com. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.